So I've just watched EnglishGoethe's video response to Professor Anton. The topic was death, and I wanted to respond not only to this video, but to EnglishGoethe's other response earlier this week to me um, about my frustration surrounding religion and atheism. Uh, and, I think maybe this word religion is too charged, and when I speak in support of it, I agitate certain mindsets. I agitate people who hold a certain worldviews unnecessarily. Perhaps my meaning could survive a different word choice than religion. Because really what I'm interested in is preserving the spirit of philosophy, the true spirit of philosophy, which I would hope is, well, it's at the core of any spiritual tradition or religion, so-called. But it's not the only thing at the core. Spirituality is also about deep feeling, not just deep thinking. And, of course, there's an element of action and of will to the spiritual or to the philosophical life, which I think the wisdom of the philosopher is both practical and theoretical. And when I say that what I'm really after is the preservation of the true spirit of philosophy, I think bound up with that pursuit of mine is a need to defend the thesis or theory of immortality. The antithesis or the counter evidence to any attempt to argue for immortality or eternal life, which are not necessarily the same thing. I'll get to that in a second. But the evidence against this is quite plainly available to our common sense. We die, the body decomposes, and the living are left with this sort of mysterious, melancholic misunderstanding of death, of the loss of the loved one. And I think this is why EnglishGoethe is driven to the belief that death is a moral evil. I don't think we have to go there, though. Because philosophy is about looking deeper than the appearance. Thinking not in order to contradict common sense, but in order to reorient common sense, in order to create a sort of transformation of one's imaginative, perceptual construction of the world, so as to reveal something which was always present in that experience, in that common sense experience of the world, but wasn't attended to, wasn't cognized, wasn't brought to the level of our thinking awareness, our noetic experience. Philosophy wants to bring into the light that which had remained in the shadows. And of course, this is an ongoing endeavor. This is a love of wisdom. This isn't the attainment of wisdom. Though one might begin to claim a sort of attainment of wisdom through a sort of death rebirth experience, through dying and living to tell the tale, which I think certain non-ordinary states of consciousness allow us to do. You can have an ego death, which it is the ego that identifies with the body which is always decomposing. There are other modes of identification that certain contemplative practices like philosophy can allow us to discover. And in these other modes of consciousness, death isn't a moral evil. Death is an opportunity for awakening to the deeper structure of the world. And I know you're frustrated, Steve, with Heidegger and the seeming obscurantism that his thought seems to carry. But I think his meditations on death, he brought death back into the center of philosophy, and for a while philosophy had been engaged in these really inane peripheral questions, about the meaning of a logical statement and the mind's, the subject's relationship to the world, the object, as if these things could be separate. So philosophy had gotten wrapped up in abstractions and forgotten that really philosophy is learning to die. And by directing our attention back to death, I think Heidegger discovered the sort of ultimate horizon that constitutes all of the meaning of our lives. Death is the horizon, that it's what we can't see beyond. It's a boundary or ultimate difference that is marked in the sphere of our experience. And it's the kind of a limit that we can tell is there. We see the shadow represented by our own carnal demise. The human is the animal that know it will die. It's not that other animals don't fear death, they will run from danger. But the human doesn't only fear death, the human has this anxiety in the face of death, which is a fear of something which can't be grasped in a sensory or perceptual way. It's a spiritual fear rather than a biological fear. And I think, Steve, when you asked this question, whether or not we are just biological machines, or if in fact we have some spiritual directive, I think, we could go into theology, but we could also just begin with biology, by recognizing that in the phenomenon of life, with the example of a living system, what we have before us is a process which cannot be explained in a mechanical way, which is to say that it cannot be explained by reference to its parts alone. A living system displays what we recognize because of its beauty, and the aesthetic feeling of orderedness that it creates within us. The living organism contains a sort of organization that transcends its particularity. And this is what Kant talked about in the Critique of Judgment. Organisms are self-organizing. Organisms are ideas, incarnated ideas that work to produce themselves, both materially and psychically. there's an interior experience which is produced and which produces in a recursive way the physical morphology of the biological organism. There's a double-sided sort of jaundiced-faced nature to all organisms. There's body and soul. And when we say that somehow the soul would survive the body, we don't mean something like that there's a separate essence that is not within the body already, or which isn't, in some sense, unified and interwoven with the body. Somehow the body is the externalization of the soul. And so when the body dies, what survives is not immediately apparent to our sensory experience in this life. And it's hard for us to think of how something like reincarnation might be possible, or life after death, let's just say. But, well, I think reincarnation must follow from the idea of life after death, since what really matters in this grand cosmic narrative in which we're embedded is the physical existence. And so if somehow what I am and what you are survives the death of what we appear to be when physically incarnated, that must immediately return in some other form to the worldly cosmic process. I could not exist without you, and we could not exist without the world. So life after death would immediately be or lead to a rebirth, and there can be all kinds of complex karmic laws that I can't even begin to understand or articulate, but we can pursue these issues in a reasonable way, because, like I said, there are certain initiatory experiences and contemplative practices that lead to non-ordinary states of consciousness that grant us access to the other side of that horizon that Heidegger recognized. See, we can be limited by Heidegger and by the sort of phenomenological tradition, which is basically Kantian, but we could also recognize it as a liberating transformation of consciousness's relationship to the cosmos. And in a sense, it's not that we can't access the thing in itself, it's that we are the thing in itself in this co-creative evolutionary process of divine incarnation. We are the flesh of ideas. So I think the Greeks would talk about immortality. Christian culture talks about eternal life. And I think the difference is that this notion of eternal life implies the desire to be incarnate. It implies that what's important is this present moment which continually unfurls itself into an ever more intense experience of itself. Not that the past isn't always there, but it's carried along in the present. The future is there as an absence and lures this wave of experience toward ever more adventurous possibilities. So death isn't an evil. Death is an opportunity to re-embody ourselves, to reimagine what we are. And in this process of reimagination, we karmically work out our destinies. Or at least, that's one story we could tell. But thanks for listening to my little meditation.